It was a quiet morning in the small suburban neighborhood, the kind of morning where everything seemed peaceful, and the world was just waking up. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow across the row of houses, and a light breeze moved the leaves in the trees. The street was usually calm at this time, but today something was different. The garbage truck rolled down the street, its engine rumbling as it made its way past the houses. The driver, a middle-aged man named Ray, was doing his usual rounds. Ray had been working as a garbage man for years, and he knew the neighborhood like the back of his hand. He smiled and waved at familiar faces as he drove past, greeting the people who were already starting their day. Ray's job was simple, but it was one he took seriously. Every day, he made sure the trash was collected on time, making life a little easier for everyone. He wasn't looking for praise or recognition. He just did his job. But today, something caught his attention. As he approached one of the houses, he noticed a little girl standing outside. She was young, around 10 years old, with long brown hair that fell over her shoulders. She was crying, her shoulders shaking with each sob. Ray could tell something was wrong, and it didn't take long before he felt the urge to stop and check on her. He pulled the garbage truck over to the side of the road and climbed out. The girl didn't seem to notice him at first. She was too focused on the tears running down her face. Ray approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. When she finally saw him, she looked up, her eyes wide with fear and sadness. "Hey there," Ray said gently, crouching down so that he was at her level. "Are you okay? What's going on?" The girl didn't answer at first. Instead, she looked at him for a moment, then looked away, wiping her eyes. Ray could see she was trying to hold it together, but the sadness in her eyes was impossible to miss. I don't want to go back inside," she whispered, her voice shaky. Ray's heart went out to her. He could feel her fear, but he wasn't sure what had caused it. Was she in trouble? Had something happened at home? He wasn't sure, but he could tell it was something serious. "Why don't you want to go back inside?" Ray asked softly, hoping to help her open up. The girl hesitated, then said, "There's something wrong. Something bad is happening." Ray felt a cold chill run through him. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew one thing for sure. The girl needed help, and he wasn't going to leave her standing there alone. "Don't worry, okay?" Ray said, offering her a reassuring smile. "I'll make sure you're safe. Just tell me what's going on, and we'll figure it out together." But the girl, still looking fearful, shook her head. She didn't seem ready to explain. Her hands clenched tightly in front of her, and she glanced nervously back at the house behind her. Ray stood there, wondering what to do next. Something wasn't right, but the girl wasn't saying much. He made a decision. He couldn't just leave her like this. Ray could tell the girl was scared. Her eyes darted around, as if she was looking for someone or something. She kept glancing nervously back at the house, as if she didn't want to be seen. Ray could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't just a little girl having a bad day. Something was wrong, and she needed help. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," Ray said softly, his voice warm and reassuring. He could see that the girl didn't fully trust him yet, but he wasn't going to give up. "Do you want me to call someone for you? Maybe your mom or a neighbor?" The girl bit her lip, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. She shook her head slowly, looking down at the ground. "I don't want her to know," the girl whispered. "I don't want her to be mad at me." Ray's heart ached for her. It wasn't hard to tell that something was seriously troubling the girl. He knew it wasn't his place to ask too many questions, but he couldn't just leave her standing there, alone and scared. "Okay," Ray said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "But you don't have to go back inside if you don't want to. You can stay here with me. We'll figure it out." The girl gave him a small, unsure nod. She didn't seem completely convinced, but she wasn't pulling away either. Ray looked around, thinking quickly. He could see the other houses on the street starting to come to life, as people were waking up and getting ready for their day. but something about the girl's quiet sobs made everything else feel distant. Ray glanced over at the garbage truck, which was parked just a few feet away. He knew the girl probably didn't want to be near her house, but he also didn't want her to feel alone. He decided to sit with her for a while, offering his company until she felt ready to talk or let someone else help. "So," Ray said, trying to break the silence, "I've been driving this truck for years. I know everyone on this street. You're one of the kids I usually see riding their bikes around, right?" The girl looked at him, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. She nodded slowly, though it was clear she wasn't completely listening. She was still very much lost in her own thoughts, her mind racing with worry. But Ray could tell that just his presence was calming her, even if she wasn't ready to talk yet. Ray continued, trying to keep the mood light. "You know, I'm the one who picks up the trash, but I also try to pick up the pieces for people when they need help. You're not alone, okay?" The girl managed a small, shaky smile, but it didn't last long. She glanced back at the house one more time, her face full of worry. Ray followed her gaze, noticing the same black car parked across the street that he had seen earlier. The tinted windows made it hard to tell who was inside, but the car had been there for a while now. It didn't seem normal. "Who's in that car?" Ray asked casually, pointing in its direction. The girl froze, her eyes wide with fear. She quickly looked away, trying to act as if she hadn't noticed it. But Ray could tell that the car made her nervous. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, I just want to stay here." Ray didn't press her for more details. It was clear that the girl wasn't ready to talk about it. But he couldn't ignore the way she was reacting to the car. Something was definitely not right. Ray made a quick decision. It was time to take action. He needed to make sure the girl was safe. Ray felt the weight of the girl's fear, and it made him more determined to help her. She was shaking, and her eyes kept darting toward the black car across the street. She didn't look like she was just upset. She looked scared. Scared of something or someone, and Ray didn't like that one bit. "I'm going to call someone for you, okay?" Ray said gently. He didn't want to push the girl too hard, but he knew that she needed more help than he could give her on his own. "I'll call your mom, or maybe the police, just to make sure everything's all right." The girl's eyes widened with panic. She grabbed his sleeve and pulled him toward her, her voice shaking as she spoke. "No, please, don't call the police," she pleaded. "I don't want anyone to know. I don't want to get in trouble." Ray's heart broke for her. He could see that she was afraid of something, but she wasn't ready to talk about it. It wasn't the time to push her. Still, Ray couldn't just sit there while she was in danger. "Okay, I won't call the police if you don't want me to," Ray said, his voice calm and steady. "But I have to make sure you're safe. Is there someone else I can call? A friend, maybe?" The girl bit her lip and looked down at the ground. She seemed to be thinking hard, weighing her options. For a moment, Ray thought she might say something, but then she just shook her head. "I can't. I don't want to get anyone else involved," she whispered. It's not safe." Ray looked around, feeling more and more concerned. The neighborhood was usually quiet, but today felt different. There was a strange energy in the air, and he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. He glanced back at the black car again, and this time he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The window was slightly rolled down. Ray could just make out a shadowy figure sitting inside. The figure was watching him closely. Ray didn't like it one bit. "I don't know what's going on," Ray said, his voice firm now. "But I'm not going to leave you here alone. Not like this. You're going to be okay, I promise." The girl's face softened just a little, as if his words had finally given her some comfort. She took a deep breath, but her eyes still looked frightened. She glanced back toward her house again, as though she was checking for anyone who might be watching. "I don't know what to do," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't feel safe at home. I thought I could run away, but I don't know where to go." Ray stood tall, his hand resting on the side of the garbage truck. He didn't have all the answers, but he wasn't going to let this little girl down. "Listen," Ray said, his voice calm but firm. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to handle this alone. You've got someone who's got your back now." The girl didn't respond right away. She seemed to be thinking, weighing her options carefully. Ray waited patiently, giving her the space she needed to decide what to do next. But he could see the conflict in her eyes. She was in a tough spot, and she didn't know who to trust. "Okay," she finally said, her voice small but determined. "I don't know who else to turn to, but I trust you." Ray nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. He was relieved she had decided to let him help. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he knew that the first step was to get her out of harm's way. Ray stood beside the girl, trying to keep calm. He could feel the tension between them, but he also knew that he couldn't show any signs of fear. He needed to stay strong for her. He glanced at the black car again, still parked across the street, the tinted windows making it impossible to see inside clearly. Whoever was in that car was watching them, and Ray didn't like it. "Do you know who's in that car?" Ray asked, trying to keep his voice casual, though his heart was racing. The girl stiffened, her eyes darting to the car before quickly looking away. She didn't answer at first, but Ray could see the fear in her face. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling, "but I think they're following me." Ray felt a chill run down his spine. This was serious. He didn't know what was happening, but he could tell that the girl was in danger, and that black car had something to do with it. "Okay," Ray said, trying to stay calm. "We need to stay together, all right. Let's move away from the street. It's better if we're out of sight for now." He looked around, scanning the area. There was a small park nearby, a place where the girl could be safe while they figured out what to do next. It was only a short walk, but Ray knew he needed to act quickly. The girl nodded, still holding tightly to his arm, as they started walking down the sidewalk. She was quiet, but Ray could feel her fear. He kept glancing over his shoulder, watching for any signs that someone might be following them. The black car remained where it was, and Ray couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they reached the park, Ray led the girl to a bench near the far side. It was hidden from the street, and it would give them some privacy. Ray made sure to keep an eye on the street while the girl sat down. He didn't want to scare her, but he had to make sure they weren't being followed. The girl sat down slowly, her hands shaking in her lap. Ray could see how scared she was, and he knew he needed to keep her calm. He sat next to her on the bench, but he didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked around, trying to make sense of the situation. "So, what's going on?" Ray finally asked, his voice gentle. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I need to understand what's happening. Why are you so scared?" The girl took a deep breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked up at him, her face still filled with fear, but there was a small amount of relief in her eyes now that they were away from the street. "I don't know what to do," she said quietly. "I've been trying to stay safe, but it's hard. My dad, he's not the same anymore, and I can't talk to anyone about it. I didn't know where else to go." Ray listened carefully, his heart aching for her. It sounded like the girl was going through something really difficult at home. Whatever was happening with her father, it was clear that it was making her feel unsafe, and that was why she had run away. "You're doing the right thing by reaching out for help," Ray said, his voice firm. "You're not alone. I'm going to help you. We'll figure this out, okay?" The girl nodded, though she still looked unsure. Ray didn't know how he was going to fix everything, but he did know one thing. He wasn't going to leave her in the dark. She deserved to be safe. Ray sat on the bench next to the girl, trying to stay calm, though inside, he was anything but. He had no idea what was really going on with her, but the situation felt serious. He kept looking over at the black car across the street, where the shadowy figure was still watching. Something wasn't right, and Ray had a growing feeling that they weren't safe here for much longer. "So, you said your dad's different now?" Ray asked softly, hoping to get more out of the girl. What do you mean by that? The girl's shoulders hunched as she pulled her arms around herself, clearly uncomfortable. She stared down at the ground for a long moment, her fingers nervously twisting together. Ray didn't push her to answer immediately. He could see that talking about it wasn't easy for her. My dad used to be nice, she finally said, her voice quiet, almost like she was talking to herself. But now, he's changed. He's not the same anymore. He's angry all the time, and I don't feel safe at home anymore. Ray's heart sank as he listened to her. He couldn't imagine what the girl had been through. She was so young, yet already carrying the weight of things no child should have to face. He put his hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. You don't have to go back if you don't want to, Ray said gently. You're safe now, and I'm here to help. The girl nodded slowly, but Ray could tell she was still scared. Her eyes darted back to the street, checking the black car again. The figure in the car hadn't moved, and Ray was starting to feel uneasy himself. Suddenly, the silence between them was broken by the sound of a phone ringing. Ray pulled his phone out of his pocket, surprised to see the number was unknown. He answered quickly, trying not to seem too obvious about the conversation. The girl was still focused on the street, so he spoke in a low voice. Hello. Ray, it's me. A voice on the other end said. Listen, I need you to get out of there. Now. Ray's eyes widened. He didn't recognize the voice, but there was something urgent in the tone. He looked at the girl, who was now standing, her body stiff with fear. What's going on? Ray asked, his voice tight with concern. You're not alone there, the voice continued. You've been spotted. They're watching. The black car across the street. It's not just anyone in there. You need to leave now. We're sending someone to help. Ray's mind raced. He looked back at the girl, whose expression had changed. She was scared, her hands trembling as she clutched her backpack. Ray stood up, feeling the weight of the situation. All right, we'll leave, Ray said, hanging up the phone. We need to go, okay? The girl didn't ask questions. She just nodded and started walking with Ray, her pace quick but careful. The tension in the air was thick, and Ray's heart pounded in his chest. Who was watching them? What was the danger? As they reached the end of the park, Ray noticed the black car slowly pulling away. It didn't turn or go anywhere far. It simply circled the block, as if waiting. He didn't know who was inside, but Ray could feel the presence of danger, and he wasn't going to take any chances. Come on, let's go, Ray said, urging the girl to walk faster. He was scanning every corner, every car, every person in sight. His instincts were screaming that they were being followed. The girl kept her eyes ahead, her steps quick but hesitant. She was starting to trust Ray more, but the fear in her eyes was still there. And Ray knew that, no matter what, he needed to keep her safe. Ray kept a firm grip on the girl's arm as they moved through the park, their footsteps quick and urgent. The black car had disappeared around the corner, but Ray couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. His mind raced, trying to think of a plan. Whatever was going on, he knew they needed to get away from the street. The girl walked beside him, her steps small and cautious, but she didn't pull away. She was trusting him now, and Ray wasn't about to let her down. They reached the edge of the park, and Ray stopped, looking both ways down the street. He saw no sign of the black car, but something told him they weren't in the clear just yet. Okay, let's head to the gas station over there, Ray said, pointing down the road. The gas station was well lit and usually had people around, which meant it might be safer for the girl. It was only a short walk, but Ray wasn't sure how much time they had before trouble found them. The girl nodded without saying a word, her face pale but determined. Ray felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He took it out and saw a new message from the unknown number. Get to safety. The police are on their way. Stay calm. Ray's heart skipped a beat. The police. He had no idea who was sending him these messages, but he was thankful. At least help was on the way. They couldn't stay in the park forever. They had to keep moving. "Let's go," Ray urged, beginning to walk toward the gas station. The girl followed, her eyes scanning the street nervously. As they walked, Ray noticed something that made his stomach tighten. A police car was slowly driving down the street, its lights flashing in the distance. Ray didn't know if they were coming for them, but he knew it was a sign that things were about to change. He wasn't sure what to do next. Should he approach the police or keep moving? He didn't want to draw attention, but he also wanted to make sure the girl was safe. As the police car got closer, Ray instinctively slowed his pace, trying to stay out of the officer's line of sight. The girl's eyes were wide, and she clutched her backpack tightly. She looked at Ray, and for the first time since they met, there was a hint of relief in her eyes. Maybe the police could help them after all. Maybe they weren't alone in this anymore. Before Ray could decide what to do, the police car came to a stop right in front of them. The officer behind the wheel rolled down the window and gave them a quick glance. Ray's heart pounded as he wondered if the officer was going to question them. But then, something unexpected happened. The officer smiled and waved. "Hey, Ray. Everything all right?" Ray blinked in surprise. "You know me?" The officer nodded. "I do. We've worked together a few times. Your neighbor called it in, said there was a little girl in trouble. I was just checking things out." Ray could hardly believe it. His neighbor had called the police. How did they know something was wrong? "Everything's fine, officer," Ray said, trying to sound calm, even though his heart was racing. "I'm just helping this girl out. She's scared. She didn't want to go home." The officer looked at the girl, then back at Ray. "All right, we'll take it from here. You've done enough. You're good, Ray." Ray felt a sense of relief wash over him. The police were there to help. They weren't in danger anymore. As the officer drove away, Ray took a deep breath. "Thank you," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. Ray smiled at her. "You're safe now. It's over." But deep down, Ray knew this was only the beginning. The real answers would come soon, but for now, they were safe. And that was all that mattered. The police car had just driven off, and Ray stood next to the girl, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. They were safe for now, but Ray couldn't stop thinking about what the girl had said earlier. She had run away from home because she didn't feel safe, and she had trusted him enough to share that with him. But there was still so much he didn't know about her situation. The girl was standing quietly beside him, her eyes focused on the ground. She still looked scared, but the panic from earlier had faded a little. Ray knew it wasn't over yet. The police might have arrived in time to help, but he had a feeling there was much more to this story. "So, what happens now?" Ray asked gently, turning to face her. He didn't want to pressure her, but he couldn't help wondering what would come next. Would the police find her family? Was she going back home? The girl hesitated, then shook her head. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," she said softly. I don't think I can go back." Ray felt his heart ache for her. He could see how much pain she was carrying. It wasn't just about running away. It was about something deeper, something that was making her afraid to go home. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to," Ray said, trying to comfort her. "The police will figure things out. But if you need time, I'll be here." She smiled weakly, but it didn't reach her eyes. The girl seemed lost in her thoughts, staring into the distance. Ray wondered if she was replaying the events in her mind, trying to make sense of everything. He knew it couldn't be easy for her. After a long silence, the girl finally spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "My dad, he's not the person he used to be. Something changed. He's different now." Ray nodded, not sure what to say. He had already guessed that her home life wasn't ideal, but hearing her speak about it made everything feel more real. The pain in her voice was undeniable. "I'm sorry," Ray said, his voice gentle. "I wish there was more I could do." The girl shook her head, wiping her eyes quickly as if trying to hold back her emotions. "You've already helped more than anyone else," she said. "I didn't know where else to go. I was scared to talk to anyone." Ray placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm glad you came to me," he said. "You don't have to go through this alone." They stood there for a while, in the quiet of the park, just taking in the moment. The girl seemed to feel a little calmer, though there was still fear in her eyes. Ray didn't know what would happen next, but he was relieved that she was no longer alone with her thoughts. Just as he was about to say something else, the sound of another police car approaching caught his attention. This time, the car stopped right in front of them. The officer inside rolled down the window, giving them both a reassuring smile. "We've got everything handled," the officer said. "You're safe now, young lady. We'll take care of everything from here." Ray watched as the officer spoke with the girl, offering her comfort and asking a few questions. He could see the girl nodding, though she still seemed unsure about what to do next. The officer promised her that she wouldn't be sent home unless she was ready, and that the authorities would look into everything. As Ray watched the officer help her, he felt a sense of relief. It wasn't over yet, but at least the girl wasn't alone anymore. She had people who could help her, and Ray had done his part to make sure she was safe. Ray took one last look at the girl, who was now talking to the officer with more confidence. He smiled, knowing she was going to be okay. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning of a new chapter for her. And for Ray, that was enough for now. Ray stood off to the side, watching as the officer spoke with the girl. He could see the fear in her eyes starting to fade as she listened to the officer's calming voice. It wasn't over yet, but it was clear that help had finally arrived for her. Ray felt a wave of relief wash over him. She was no longer alone in this. The officer asked a few more questions, making sure the girl felt comfortable and safe. Ray could hear her answering quietly, her voice shaky but more confident than before. The officer was being gentle with her, taking things slowly, giving her time to speak without feeling rushed. It made Ray feel better, knowing that the girl was in good hands. As the conversation continued, Ray stepped back, giving them space. He didn't want to intrude on the moment. His part in the story was over for now. The girl was safe, and that was all that mattered. A few minutes later, the officer turned to Ray, a smile on their face. "Thank you for everything you've done," the officer said. "You really helped us get to the bottom of this." Ray smiled back, feeling a small but real sense of pride. He hadn't expected to find himself in the middle of something like this, but he was glad he could make a difference. Sometimes, the right thing to do was as simple as stopping for a scared little girl on the side of the road. He didn't know what had been happening at the girl's house, but it was clear she had been in a dangerous situation, and he had helped get her out of it. "No problem at all," Ray said, his voice steady. "I just did what anyone would do." The officer nodded. "Well, you did the right thing. We'll take care of everything from here. You can go home now." Ray nodded, taking one last look at the girl. She was still talking to the officer, but now there was a sense of calm around her. Ray was sure that whatever happened next, she was going to be okay. As he started to walk away, Ray felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. It had been a long day, and he was tired, but it felt good to know he had helped someone in need. He had no idea what would happen to the girl next, but he was hopeful that things would get better for her. No one should have to face fear alone. Ray made his way back to the garbage truck, feeling the familiar weight of his workday waiting for him. But this day had been different. It wasn't about picking up trash or moving on to the next street. It was about making sure someone was safe, and that felt more important than anything else. As he climbed back into the truck and started the engine, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The girl was still with the officer, talking quietly. The tension had finally broken, and Ray felt a sense of peace knowing that he had made a difference. He wasn't a hero, but sometimes small acts of kindness were all it took to change someone's life. Ray drove off, the sun now higher in the sky, knowing that while the day had started quietly, It had ended with something far more meaningful. As Ray drove the garbage truck down the street, his mind replayed the events of the morning. It had been an ordinary day at first, just another round of picking up trash. But it had turned into something unexpected. Helping the girl had changed the way he looked at his job, and maybe even the way he looked at life. The street was quiet again, and the hustle of the neighborhood had resumed. People were going about their day, unaware of what had happened just a few hours ago. Ray could still feel the weight of the girl's trust in him, and the gratitude in her eyes when she finally felt safe. It was a feeling that was hard to describe, but it was a feeling he wouldn't forget. As he pulled into the next block, he thought about the girl's future. The police were handling things now, and he was sure they would take care of her. But he wondered what had happened to make her so scared. What was going on at her house? And how could he have known that stopping to help her would be the right thing to do? He wasn't a hero. He didn't do anything special. But to that little girl, he had been someone who cared. Someone who had listened when she was too afraid to speak, and that made all the difference. Later that afternoon, after finishing his route, Ray received another message from the same unknown number that had contacted him earlier. He opened it, wondering what it might say. "Thank you for your help today. The girl is safe now. You may never know how much you've changed her life. Sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference." Ray smiled as he read the message. He didn't need recognition or thanks. Knowing that he had made a difference was enough. He thought back to that moment when he first saw the girl running out of her house, tears in her eyes, and how he had stopped without thinking twice. In that instant, he had done what anyone should do. He had offered help, and it had mattered. As the day turned into evening, Ray reflected on the world around him. It wasn't perfect. People faced difficult situations every day, and sometimes it felt like there was nothing he could do to help. But moments like today reminded him that kindness was powerful. A simple gesture, a willingness to listen, could change someone's life. Ray pulled the garbage truck into the lot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, taking in the quiet. His job wasn't glamorous, but it had meaning. Helping people, even in small ways, was important, and he knew that, even if no one else noticed, he had done something good today. As he walked toward his car, ready to head home for the night, Ray felt a quiet sense of pride. He didn't need applause or praise. The girl's safety was reward enough. He had done the right thing when it mattered most. And that, Ray thought, was all anyone could really ask for.